Alright, welcome to our section on middle childhood. Okay, our middle childhood section is going to seem really short. This is because we covered a lot of it that's typically covered in middle childhood already. For instance, they introduce a lot of intelligence theories and like IP theory in middle childhood, and social emotional development in middle childhood talks about family issues a lot, and we put that in our family systems lecture. So middle childhood is going to seem shorter than the rest of the periods just because we've covered so much already. So let's start with, hey, what happened to physical development? Okay, I don't have a special lecture for physical development in middle childhood because honestly not a whole lot is going on. We see growth, we see improvement, we see sophistication. Okay, we just see they're slowly getting better at skills. Okay, they're getting taller, they're getting heavier, they're getting more balanced, more coordinated. They start to play games and sports. Okay, their muscles get stronger, balance and coordination improves, and their reaction time is steadily improving until they're about the age of 18. But adults are still better than children at reaction time. So on average, they grow about 2 inches in height per year and about 5 to 7 pounds per year. And this continues until puberty when we see a jump. So here's just a basic chart of some gross motor skills and some fine motor skills and different ages at which they have certain skills. I'm not going to expect you to memorize this. This is just something you can refer to if you're curious. So this shows you like when they could ride a bike, when they can play sports. Okay. Fine motor skills, about 6 to 7 is when they can tie shoelaces, do mazes. Again, this varies very widely by child, and it depends on what they are interested in and what they've practiced that determines at what age they can do these skills. Again, don't worry too much about this. Gender differences are very minimal until puberty. In middle childhood, girls and boys are about the same. So now we're going to get into concrete operations. So this is Piaget's third stage of development, and there's a whole lot going on here. The age of 7 used to be called the dawn of reason, or the age of reason, because that's when children were thought to suddenly be capable of reasonable thought. And Piaget says that 6 or 7 is when children enter concrete operational thought. This is a big shift in childhood. We see a big change in children between the ages of 5 and 7. There's just something that's going on in their brains, and we've recognized this for a very long time. There's a reason why age 6 is traditionally when children start school. We see a lot of improved executive functions. Remember, these are the functions in the frontal cortex of the brain. So they have greater language comprehension, increased memory and attention, greater self-control, awareness, emotional control. We see huge improvements in all of these skills. Concrete operations is really the stage of logic. This is when they begin to use logic to solve problems. In pre-operational thought, they did not have any logic. So if object permanence was the goal of sensory motor, and symbolic thought was the goal of pre-operational, then logic is the goal of concrete operations. Okay, remember Piaget's tasks of conservation and how preschoolers failed it? Well, now in middle childhood they understand conservation. It doesn't appear all at once, however. For instance, mass comes first, followed by weight and volume. They develop the ideas of conservation of different tasks in different stages. They also gain reversibility, which is the ability to mentally transform something and then reverse the transformation. So it's being able to do something in your head and then also in your head kind of undo it. So reversibility also helps them complete those conservation tasks successfully. And then the biggest reason preschoolers failed the conservation tasks was because of what Piaget called centration. If you remember, that's being able to only look at one thing at a time. So you can look at the length but not the width. Okay, so in middle childhood we see decentration. So now they're able to look at more than one aspect or dimension at the same time. They're able to realize that something can be more than one thing simultaneously. Okay, so this is a big shift from preschoolers. They also gain what's called class inclusion. So this is understanding that something can belong into a bigger class than itself. For example, apples and bananas are part of the category or the class fruits. Dogs and cats are both part of the class mammals, who are animals. So they are learning this, that things can be in more than one group. They get something called transitive inference. This is just like if A leads to B and B leads to C, then A leads to C. It's like they're able to connect the dots in a way. So an example of this is if Sandy is taller than Tom and Tom is taller than Billy, then who's taller, Sandy or Billy? And we can use transitive inference to realize that it must be Sandy. Another thing is seriation. This means they can put things in order, a series. Okay, so they can usually do this without mistakes. So if you give them a bunch of sticks, they could arrange them in order of length. They could arrange things by color. Okay, so they're able to put things in order. They are still very much in literal thought. Okay? This means they still don't get metaphors, they don't get sarcasm, they don't get euphemisms. They're still very, very literal. They're moving past pretend play, but they still lack abstract thought. And they tend to draw on their own experiences to draw conclusions. Okay, they can't think beyond their own experiences yet. In this age, rules are really important, and they're usually absolute. Children will fight if they have been taught different house rules for the same game. You can see this, if they think there's different rules for the same game, they'll really fight about it because they think that rules are black and white and they have to be the same for everybody. We see this in games like Monopoly. A lot of people play Monopoly as the free parking space lets you get all the money. That's not actually in the rules. That's not part of the rules of Monopoly. So you'll see children fight over things like this. But because they're understanding rules, they're now able to play more complex games, including sports and bigger games on both the playground, physical sports, and do more complicated board games because they now have a deeper understanding of rules and how things work. Okay, language. Language development in middle childhood is linked to their cognitive gains. So just as they're learning that things can belong to more than one group in class inclusion, and that one thing has more than one property in decentration, they're also learning that words can belong to more than one situation. Words can have more than one meaning. This is especially true in English. We have a lot of words for the same thing. The same word can have different meanings and even pronunciations depending on the situation. So, such as the word left, it has a lot of different meanings, or the word right, it can have a lot of different meanings. We have a lot of words in our language that can mean very different things depending on their context. Again, they're still very literal in their thoughts, so they're still very literal in their language. While in concrete ops, they have a hard time with metaphors and literary devices. They don't fully grasp sarcasm, but those who are exposed to a lot of sarcasm will develop it sooner. But their language is still very literal. So what's funny to them in language now? What jokes do middle childhoods do they like? Well, now that they're understanding that words can have more than one meaning, what they find really funny are puns. A pun is kind of a joke where you do a play on words. So they really like knock-knock jokes. They like jokes that play on the meaning or the sound of a word. Okay, so I have an example here. What do you get when you combine a bird, a vehicle, and a dog? Well, you get a flying carpet. Okay, so they think jokes like that are really funny, things that just play on words. Some of the neuroscience that's going on, we talked about some of their new cognitive skills, so what's happening behind the scenes to explain that? Well, we see a big change in their frontal lobe. Okay? The most important changes occur in the areas responsible for regulating attention and inhibition. Okay? So this means that they can pay attention to things longer, and inhibition means they can sort of squash impulses, they can keep themselves from getting distracted, they can stop themselves from doing things. And this can help them with considered decision making. They can really start to think things through and plan and make decisions. Pruning is big during this stage. Most of the pruning in the brain occurs during this period, and we talked about how pruning just makes the brain work more efficiently overall because it gets rid of connections that aren't being used and strengthens the connections that remain. We see their processing speed increase because of this pruning. This means that signals can travel from one part of their brain to another much faster, and this helps them think faster and do everything in their brain more efficiently. We already talked a little bit about inhibition. The pruning and the changes in the frontal lobe mean that they're better at it. Inhibition is the ability to delay gratification, to think before acting. Okay? So an example of this is the marshmallow experiment. We saw this in preschool. Remember that preschoolers were really bad at this. They couldn't delay their gratification. They couldn't stop their impulses to eat the marshmallow. But in middle childhood, they're much better at this. There's another example called the Stroop test. If you're interested, you can open this slide and follow the link to see what it is. But this is the test where they show words that say one color but are shaded another color. So you might see the word green, but the letters are in red. And the child has to say red instead of green. And this shows inhibition because you have to inhibit your natural response to just read the word which says green and instead say the color of the word. And it's really hard. And if you want to test yourself, please follow this link and do it. Another version of the Stroop test is that children are shown a black card with white stars and they're instructed to say the word day and vice versa. So they have to inhibit their initial response, their gut response to something in order to say the counterintuitive response. A younger child, a preschooler, will say what he sees regardless of the instructions. They can't inhibit their initial response. So we really see an improvement in inhibition in middle childhood. There's also something called the tapping test, which would say like tap once when I say twice and twice when I say once. So again, you have to do something that is contrary to your instinct, contrary to your natural impulse. Okay, we are going to continue this lecture in the next video.